November 30 marks the annual commemoration of Yom Haplitim, a day dedicated to remembering the exile of Jews from Arab lands. Actually, the entire month of November is dedicated to the history and heritage of the Jewish communities from Arab lands and Iran. Good morning, Lynn.
Thank you. Good morning.
You were selected as the Jewish Shakogern of the Year in 2004. You actually wear many hats, but first of all, you are a storyteller. Besides being a recruiter in communication and marketing, you have performed in many global venues for more than 30 years.
Who's counting?
Telling your story and the story of your parents and ancestors, and won many awards for your incredible talent,
Thank you.
I must say. Lynn, your parents, Eddie, born in Egypt, and Lynn Hazan, who was born in Syria and left Egypt in 1951.
Correct.
They knew that they were no longer safe before they decided to leave. They moved to Canada after your father was denied entry to the US. I would love to hear more about your parents. Mm-hmm. How was their life back then in Egypt, in Syria, before they decided to immigrate, especially in Egypt, because they got married in Egypt, right? And so what was their life before they decided to immigrate to Canada?
You're asking a very good question. My mother often described her life living in Egypt as la bonne vie. So
Beautiful
what
life.
she had growing up was probably an exception in many ways, because as a French citizen growing up in Cairo, they had a good life. Her father was very busy in the world of business and trade. Actually, here's a picture of my grandfather wearing the fez. So it showed as a sign of respect in working with the Arab community that he would work with them and understood what they were like culturally as well, to be able to work together. When my mother and my father, no, actually it was just my mother, when she was growing up, she went to the French lycée. And here she is as a little girl. So
in Egypt?
In Egypt, in Cairo. And the French lycée system was a very, very rigorous education program for people speaking French who were citizens of France or French in the country as well. So it really showed not only her dedication to being French, but to being educated in the French language and culture while living in Egypt. So she spoke Arabic, she spoke French. You obviously pick up a lot of languages just being around the people and the culture. And this was my father's passport when he was growing up in Syria. And you notice it says that he was French. And what I love looking at all of these documents, there's my father as a very young man. He was very serious. And when I looked through his passport, I saw that he traveled quite a bit. He was in Italy, he was in different countries going to visit, and you have all the dates. So you see where he was before the war, after the war. And then my mother, I had her passport, and she had a French passport as well. And then when they married, here's my mother as a young woman. And what I love about them is when they got married, they were able to document their history and how their name changed.
I would like to ask you, your father Eli also attended a French school back in Syria, right? Collège Français des Frères Lazaristes, a French Catholic school in Damascus.
Yes.
So he studied French and Arabic.
Yes.
And Hebrew too,
yes.
I think?
It's interesting that you're bringing up Hebrew, because this is my father's school records. And here you can see a very serious young man here.
Born in Syria, right?
Yeah, in Damascus. He was born in Damascus, and it has all his school grades. His
It's in French. He has very good grades.
Yes, and here he learned Arabic. So a French Catholic school in Damascus was teaching its students French, Arabic, and Hebrew. All three languages that demonstrated the fact that it was a very integrated culture for my father growing up, even as a Jew.
Lynn, you mentioned that the Hazan family had a deep Jewish life in Damascus and then in Cairo, in Egypt. Can you explain a little
it's
more?
very interesting when you think about what was it like to be a Jew living in a country where you have many different nationalities? When my parents were growing up, it was a different civilization and treatment between Jews and Arabs because they worked together, they knew each other in business and in life down the street, for example. And this is wild because this actually is a Haggadah, the Passover story. And this is written in French on one side and in Hebrew on the other. So what is lovely about this Haggadah is that when I was growing up in Montreal, this Haggadah was one of many that we would have around the Seder table with our relatives. And what was so cool is that most of the people sitting around the table were literally from Egypt. So it was their personal journey of leaving Egypt, and it became my story because in sharing my family's story, it became part of my heritage.
So, Lynn, why did your parents decide to leave Egypt? I understand that they left Italy without anything, right? Just the clothes.
Their clothes and some furniture, yeah.
Yeah, because their assets were frozen by the government when they left, right?
So the State of Israel had just been formed in May. And then they're saying, I'm not sure if it's going to be very safe. Because even though they cared very much about Israel, it was just a brand new state. So they didn't know what life was going to be like and how they would be able to adapt to a country where there were still some problems. They identified more as French citizens, and that's why they wanted to go to Quebec. They tried the U.S., but the government said, you can't come in. And Montreal was a French-speaking city, and we already had relatives who had started the migration pattern. So they wanted to be with other family members, so that's why they moved to Montreal.
Of course, yeah. So you were born in Canada, right?
Yes, I was born in Montreal.
What was it like growing up in Canada as a daughter of Jewish Middle Eastern immigrants? What languages did you speak growing up?
It's very interesting because we grew up feeling very proud of being Jews. So growing up in Montreal, we spoke French. We went to English-speaking schools. Our synagogue, Congregation Bethel, was only 4 houses away from where I grew up. So I literally spent my life at that synagogue growing up, going to Hebrew school. I was the youth director at the synagogue as well. And so the Jewish life lived in our house. My mother sang in the choirs. We always celebrated all of the holidays together. And as we brought the family members from Egypt to Canada, guess where they stayed? In our house, until we got people settled. So the whole thing of doing good and fulfilling the mitzvah of reuniting the family was very important in our family.
So your father, Lynn Hazan, found relatives also from Algeria.
Right.
So tell me a bit more about the name Hazan. What is its origin? Could you tell a few words about those artifacts that you brought? And my very last question, what lessons do you want to pass on to the next generation?
Perfect. So what's interesting is in looking over family history. So my father's family, this is interesting, was born in Damascus. They were very Jewish. Why? They had a synagogue in the house in Damascus. They had 3 Torah scrolls.
Your grandfather?
My father's house in Damascus. So they were very Jewishly involved. And it's like, wait a minute, a synagogue in a house? It wasn't like you go to a separate facility, it was in the house. And they had 3 Torah scrolls in the house. So obviously they would host ceremonies and rituals and services. And then unfortunately, the government took the Torah scrolls away. Thankfully, other members of my family, my Uncle Jacques, was able to save the Megillat Esther. And he had donated in Montreal to one of the synagogues. I'm still doing research on that.
When did the government take away those artifacts? I mean, the Sefer Torah and...
Yeah. So
before they left?
No, I don't know. You see, there's some pieces of this story that I don't know the dates. However, we do know that their Torah scrolls were seized by the government. They had a lot of Jewish rituals and services in the house. So we were able to get the Megillat Esther and bring that to Canada. The Torah scrolls, no. And the fact is that
You still have it? The Megillat Esther?
the Megillat Esther was donated to a synagogue in
okay.
Montreal, so I still have to go find out where it is. To do this research, it's not a one-shot deal.
Right, of
You
course.
have to keep going and asking a lot of questions. So they had a very active Jewish lifestyle in Damascus. And also, when my father left Damascus, he knew that it was not going to be safe for him to go back. So he left in 1948. And when he was growing up, he was a citizen of Algeria, and they wanted to become French citizens. So they did the research, and they found out that a relative was a French legionnaire living in Algeria whose last name was Hazan, Hazan. So they became Hazan, little D-I-T, Tota, T-O-T-A-H. And just recently I was doing the research about Tota, and it's a tree. And it's a very common Arab name.
In Arabic.
Yeah, Arabic name. So they eventually shifted over to Hazan. As you can see here in my father's school records,
Yeah,
here he's
Hazan.
Hazan. And the Tota disappeared. What's fascinating in doing the research, I also discovered that my father's name, besides Gabriel, which is a Hebrew name obviously, his name was Musa. And Musa is Moses in Arabic.
Right.
So you see the interaction
Absolutely.
with all the different cultures for the good. And when they moved to Canada, they just kept Hazan, Hazan. So you can say it English, French, and Hebrew.
But his parents, your grandfather and mother, they were born in Syria, right?
Yeah, as far as I know.
Okay.
But again, on my mother's side, I have this great-grandfather who was
From
born in
Egypt.
Jerusalem.
Oh, okay.
So my grandfather was born in Egypt, so I still need to verify all the facts. It takes a long time because each time I look at a document, I find something new. And then I dig, and then I dig. So like, I only recently found out that my father was Musa. And what's fascinating in terms of passing on traditions, my brother is Morris. My cousin is Maurice. So our family decided we needed an M
Right.
for their names, so we didn't name them Moshe or Musa. Instead, we named Morris for my brother and Maurice for my cousin.
Right.
So we carried on the names in our family tradition. So you asked also about storytelling and why these stories are so important to me.
Yeah, and what do you want to pass on to the next generation?
For me to bring a story that is factual history and make it our story, and then it becomes my story that I can then share with other people, that to me brings me huge joy, because it's not just facts and history. Right. And when you learn history, you know, what date, what happened, who won, who lost, and it becomes just facts and figures.
Right.
And instead, what I like to do is to use the story to illustrate real people whose lives were affected by war, by peace, by collecting their family artifacts and making it part of my story that then I can share with other people. And then it just doesn't become a bunch of artifacts, it becomes human history.
Absolutely.
And it brings the sense of excitement that I can share with other people, like we're doing here today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lynn.
Thank you.
It was really, really amazing. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.